At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang. It was my daughter. "Dad, please help me. My husband. I don't know who he is anymore. I'm scared." I tried to calm her, but the moment the call ended, I knew I wouldn't sleep, because this wasn't the first sign. Weeks earlier, my granddaughter whispered that her father would slip out after midnight, standing outside for hours making video calls. "Grandpa, there was a woman, not Mom." That's when it began. The quiet investigation, the missing hours, the lies that didn't fit. And now, one truth froze me. He wasn't the man I once knew. Welcome to Revenge, Dad. One small thing before we start. Leave me a comment and tell me, have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they weren't who you thought, yes or no? I read everyone, and your honesty means more than you know. A quick note, some details in this story are adapted for narrative purposes. The lesson behind it is what truly matters. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, and the sound my daughter made when I answered wasn't crying. It was the sound of a woman whose lungs had forgotten how to breathe between sobs. I was already standing before the second ring, bare feet on cold hardwood 6th floor of our Upper East Side mansion, Manhattan, glowing through the window like a circuit board that never sleeps. I pressed the phone to my ear and heard my daughter Celeste Whitfield Voss, 39 years old, and the strongest woman I have ever raised, fall apart in 3 words. "Dad, save me. I am Conrad Whitfield. I am 69 years old. I built Whitfield Grid Systems from a 2-room office in Queens 41 years ago. And today my company powers the smart grid across 14 eastern states. I have designed systems that balance $4.2 billion of electrical infrastructure across 17,000 nodes. I have diagnosed failures in substations at 3 in the morning from a laptop screen. I have never not once heard a sound that scared me the way my daughter's breathing scared me that night. My husband," she said. "I don't know who he is anymore. I'm so scared, Dad." Beside me, Lorraine sat up in bed without asking a single question. My wife is 66 years old, and she has spent 42 years married to a man who reads voltage and wires for a living. Somewhere along the way, she learned to read it in people. She looked at the way I held the phone, 2 hands jaw locked. Weight shifted forward, and she understood. She put her hand on the mattress and waited. "I'm here," I told Celeste. "I'm not going anywhere." She cried for another 90 seconds. I counted. Not because I'm cold, because counting is how I stay anchored when the current surges. 90 seconds. Then her breathing slowed enough for words. "I'm going to tell you a story," I said, "from the beginning, and when I'm finished, you'll understand why we're going to be okay. Let me tell you something about phone calls at 2 a.m. They never bring you anything you want to hear. But this one I had been expecting for 47 days. Because 47 days earlier, at a Friday dinner in the Hamptons, I watched my son-in-law lie to my face, and I logged every detail the way I log anomalies in a grid diagnostic silently, precisely and with the absolute certainty that the data would matter later. Late September, our family's last weekend of summer tradition. The Hamptons estate that Lorraine and I bought in 2004 when the company went public. Salt air through the open windows. Grilled branzino on the table, a bottle of Barolo that I had been saving for no particular occasion. My daughter sat across from her husband. My granddaughter Ren Voss, 10 years old, sat at the far end of the table, drawing a horse on a cloth napkin with a purple marker, completely unaware that every adult around her was performing a play in which everyone knew their lines except her father. Garrison Voss, 42, my son-in-law. The man I hired out of Columbia Business School 12 years ago, promoted through 3 divisions, and groomed to inherit the operational side of my company. He excused himself from the table at 7:42 p.m. "It's 5 minutes," he said. "Quick call." He was gone for 25. When he came back, the branzino was cold, and Celeste had refilled her wine twice. Garrison sat down, adjusted his napkin, and smiled the kind of smile that is engineered to close a conversation before it opens. "Sorry about that. The Dallas office. Emergency with the Q4 projections. You know how it is." I do know how it is. I also know that Whitfield Grid Systems does not have a Dallas office. We have offices in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and a satellite operations center in Richmond. Dallas is not on the grid. It never has been. I've spent 35 years reading electrical systems. A failing node doesn't announce itself. It runs hot draws too much current. And the only people who notice are the ones who know what normal looks like. Garrison looked normal that night to anyone who didn't know what normal actually was. But I do. His left hand went to his phone pocket 3 times in 2 minutes. Not to check it to confirm it was still there, the way a man confirms a secret is still hidden. When Celeste asked, "Is everything okay?" he answered her while looking at his plate. Not her eyes, his plate. And there was a faint sheen of sweat on his left temple, visible only because the candle was positioned at the right angle, despite the cool ocean breeze coming off the water at 63 degrees. Men who tell the truth don't sweat in a sea breeze. I looked at Lorraine. She looked at me. 1 second. In 42 years of marriage, we have developed a language that doesn't require words. That 1 second glance said everything you see it too. Yes, what do we do? Nothing, not yet, not tonight. I smiled. I picked up my wine. I tasted the Barolo, a 2016 vintage that deserved better company, and I watched Garrison Voss settle back into his chair, like a man who believed he had gotten away with something. Wren looked up from her napkin drawing. "Daddy, do you want to see my horse?" "Beautiful, sweetheart," Garrison said without looking. I built the smart grid for 14 eastern states. I know when a node is drawing power, it shouldn't be drawing. That night in the Hamptons, watching my son-in-law smile with sweat on his temple and a lie on his lips, I thought this node has been compromised for a long time. The question wasn't whether it would fail. The question was what it was connected to and how deep the fault line ran before the whole system came down. The fault line ran deeper than I thought, and my granddaughter showed me exactly how deep between spoonfuls of Cheerios without looking up from her diary. Saturday morning, 7:15 a.m., the Hamptons kitchen. September light came through the east windows and long gold bars that landed on the counter where Wren sat with her cereal bowl and a purple diary she carried everywhere. Everyone else was still asleep. Garrison had stayed up late. I heard him come in past 1. Celeste was in the guest room with the door closed. Lorraine wouldn't be down until 8. It was just me and my granddaughter, coffee in my hand, silence between us. The comfortable kind, the kind you earn with a child who trusts you. Then Wren said, without any preamble, without any sense that she was about to hand me the most important piece of information I had received in 6 months. "Grandpa, why does Dad go to the garage to make phone calls every night?" I set the coffee cup down. Slowly, the ceramic touched the granite counter without a sound. I saw him video call one time. She continued turning a page in her diary. There was a woman and a really small baby. She looked up at me for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to check that I was listening, not long enough to register that my heart rate had just doubled, and then went back to her Cheerios. I smiled, the kind of smile that costs everything behind it. "Oh, really?" I kept my voice the same pitch, the same warmth, the same grandpa in the kitchen tone I'd used 1,000 times. "Was the door open or closed when you saw that?" "Closed, but I peeked." She scraped the bottom of the bowl. "Grandpa, can I have more cereal?" "Of course, sweetheart." I poured more Cheerios. I added milk. I asked her casually, the way you ask a child about a cartoon she watched, what time it was when she saw the call. "Late," she said, "after her bedtime." Had she seen it more than once? She thought about it. Maybe 3 times. Was the woman someone she recognized? No. Was the baby crying? She didn't remember. Could she hear what Daddy was saying? No. The door was too thick. 4 questions, 4 answers, each one a data point, clicking into a diagnostic I had been running in the back of my mind since spring. Have you ever had a child tell you something so devastating that the hardest part wasn't hearing it? It was making sure your face didn't change. I sat across from my 10-year-old granddaughter, poured her cereal, and smiled, while inside my chest something cold and precise clicked into place. Not rage. Rage is wasteful. What I felt was the thing that comes after rage if you're the kind of man who builds systems for a living. The calm recognition that the problem is now confirmed, the scope is now defined, and the only remaining variable is the response. I spent the rest of Saturday being a grandfather. I took Wren to the beach. I grilled steaks for dinner. I laughed at Garrison's jokes. I poured his wine. I watched him check his phone under the table twice, and I cataloged each instance without expression. That night, after everyone was asleep, I walked down to the 3rd-floor library and sat in the leather chair facing the window. No phone, no laptop. Just the sound of the Atlantic through a cracked window and the dim glow of a brass lamp falling across family photographs on the shelf. Lorraine and me at our wedding, 1982. Celeste's college graduation. Wren's first birthday, Garrison, holding her above his head, both of them laughing. I gripped the armrests until my knuckles turned white, held it. Then I released. In 35 years of building power systems, I've learned that the moment you discover a fault in the grid, You don't shut everything down. You isolate the damaged section, you reroute the load, and you keep the lights on for every person who depends on you, even when the part that's failing is the part you trusted most. I sat in that chair for 2 hours. The ocean didn't stop. The photographs didn't change. And by the time the brass clock on the mantel read 1:47 a.m., I had made my decision. At 6:03 a.m., Sunday morning, I picked up my phone and called Sterling Prescott. He is 71 years old, the finest corporate litigation attorney I have ever known, and the only man outside my family whose phone I would call before dawn. He answered on the first ring. He always does. I need to see you Monday, 7 a.m. Your house. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what happened. 26 years of working together had taught him what my voice sounds like when the situation is past the point of explanation. I'll have coffee ready, he said. I hung up. I looked at my Patek Philippe. The watch Lorraine gave me for our 40th anniversary, the one she had engraved on the back with 2 words, "Stay steady." The time was 6:04 a.m. I walked downstairs, made breakfast, and spent the last day of our family vacation, smiling at the man who was betraying my daughter, my company, and everything I had built. But something had shifted, not in him and me. The illusion was gone now, stripped clean by a child's careless truth. Every glance he gave, every word he spoke, every casual movement of his hands, I saw it differently. Patterns emerged where before there had only been noise, motives aligned, timelines tightened. That Monday was September 30th. 47 days before the deadline for the Texas contract, a contract worth hundreds of millions that someone was trying to take from me. And the man behind all of it, the man who had turned my son-in-law into a weapon aimed at my family, didn't know the clock had just started. Not for me, for him. The clock started ticking on a Monday, and the first person I told was a man who had spent 20 years putting people in prison for doing exactly what I suspected my son-in-law was doing. Sterling Prescott, 67 years old. Former federal prosecutor turned corporate litigation attorney, poured coffee from an espresso machine older than most of his associates. His Upper West Side brownstone smelled like dark roast and old case files. Dawn light came through the tall windows in pale sheets. He set 2 cups on the table between us, sat down across from me, and said one word, talk. So I talked. I told him about 6 months of small irregularities, phone calls that didn't add up, meetings that ran long without explanation, a pattern of absences that looked random until you mapped them against a calendar. I told him about the Hamptons dinner, the lie about a non-existent office, the sweat on a cool night. I told him about my granddaughter and what she had seen through a garage door, a video call, a woman, a baby. Prescott didn't move, didn't take notes, didn't interrupt. 26 years of working together had taught me that Prescott's stillness was proportional to the severity of what he was hearing. That morning, he was perfectly still. When I finished, he picked up his espresso, drank it in one swallow, cold by now, and set the cup down with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. "What do you want?" he asked. Not the emotional desire, the concrete outcome. I had been waiting for that question since 6:03 a.m. the day before. 4 things I said. My granddaughter safe, my daughter free, my company intact. And whoever is behind this, I want them to lose everything they used against me. Prescott pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer beside him. He uncapped a pen, the same Mont Blanc he'd used in federal court for 2 decades, and wrote 4 lines. 1 for each objective. He folded the pad closed and looked at me over the top of his glasses. In 20 years as a federal prosecutor, he said, I've never seen anyone this calm after learning their son-in-law is betraying them. You've been preparing for this. How long? 6 months. Maybe longer, then we're not reacting, he said. We're executing. Let me tell you what it costs to sit across from a man you've trusted for a quarter century and admit that your own family has been turned into a weapon against you. It costs every ounce of pride you've ever built. It costs the version of yourself who believed that love and loyalty were the same thing. It costs the assumption, the one you carry in your chest, like a second heartbeat, that the people closest to you are incapable of being used. I paid that cost over 2 cups of espresso on a Monday morning, and I didn't flinch. Not because I'm brave, because I'd already done my flinching alone in a Hamptons library at 2 a.m. Prescott and I spent 3 hours building the framework: legal exposure, evidence requirements, timeline constraints, family risk, corporate damage, custody leverage, financial trails. Every possibility went onto the table, and every possibility had to survive. One question: would it protect Ren without warning the people who had already proven they were willing to use her? By 10 a.m., I had the architecture of a plan that would take 47 days to execute if I didn't make a single mistake. The next day, I called Ethan Cole. Ethan is 44 years old, a former FBI counterintelligence agent who spent 12 years at the Bureau before I hired him to run internal security at Whitfield Grid Systems. He's the kind of man who walks into a room and reads the exits before he reads the faces. I found him in the 47th floor server room, standing between two racks of blinking green monitors with the recycled air humming at exactly the pitch that tells you the system is running clean. "I need a metadata audit," I said. "Corporate email, one account, 15 months. Ethan didn't ask whose account. He looked at my face, read what he needed, and nodded. 26 hours later, he placed a report on my desk. In a power grid, a parasitic load is a device that draws current without performing useful work. You don't always see it on the dashboard, but your system runs hotter, runs slower. And one day, the breaker trips, and you realize something has been feeding off you for months. Ethan's report was that breaker. 47 encrypted emails, sent from a corporate account to anonymous addresses routed through a server in Houston, every 3 weeks like clockwork. And every single one was sent within 48 hours of a Whitfield Grid strategic planning meeting. Ethan had done something else without being asked, the instinct of a man trained by the Bureau to follow patterns, not just document them. He overlaid the email dates against our contract loss timeline from the past year. 3 contracts, $890 million, lost to competing bids that came in with pricing so precise it could only mean one thing. Someone on the other side knew our numbers before we submitted them. I read the first page once, then again. By the third time, the words stopped being information and became confirmation. "Who in Houston runs a server with this kind of infrastructure?" I asked. "Someone with resources," Ethan said. "Someone who's been listening to us for at least 15 months. And someone who knows exactly what our strategic planning meetings produce because they've been reading the minutes within 48 hours every single cycle." He paused, then added quietly, "This wasn't careless. This was structured. Whoever built this didn't want one stolen contract. They wanted a pipeline." I stood at the window of my 47th floor office and looked south toward the financial district. Somewhere past that skyline, past Washington, past the Carolinas, a server in Houston was humming with data stolen from my company by a man who sat at my dinner table and called me Dad. I had lost 3 contracts worth nearly $1 billion in the past year. I had blamed the market. I had blamed timing. I had blamed the natural cycle of competition in an industry where everyone plays hard. I was wrong. It wasn't the market. It was war, and I hadn't known I was fighting until the enemy had already drawn blood 3 times. Once you know you're at war, the world divides into 2 categories: information that confirms the attack and information you haven't understood yet. That Thursday, both categories arrived within 24 hours of each other, not with noise or chaos, but with the quiet precision that makes a threat far more dangerous. Because the most devastating attacks rarely announce themselves. They reveal themselves in fragments and details you almost overlook. My granddaughter is 10 years old, and she keeps a diary. Purple cover, silver clasp, her name written in block letters on the inside front page. She carries it everywhere, the Hampton School. The back seat of the car, the living room sofa where I found her that afternoon, with a pencil in her hand and a glass of apple juice sweating on the coffee table beside her. I sat down on the leather sofa next to her. Afternoon light came through the tall windows and fell across the diary's open pages in pale gold. Dust floated lazily in the air, the kind of stillness that tricks you into believing nothing in the world is wrong. She was writing something carefully, her tongue pressed against her upper lip, the way she does when she concentrates. "Grandpa," she said, without looking up, "should I write people's real names in my diary? Because if someone reads it, they'll know who I'm talking about. But if I don't use real names, I won't remember later." I looked at her, this small, serious girl with her pencil and her purple diary and her perfectly logical dilemma, and I felt something tighten. Behind my ribs that had nothing to do with strategy or evidence, or the encrypted emails sitting in a file on my desk. It was something older, something instinctive. The awareness that innocence once documented becomes evidence. "If you're writing the truth," I said, "use their real name. The truth doesn't need to be anonymous." She nodded, firm, decisive. The nod of a girl who had just received a rule that made sense to her, filed it, and moved on. She went back to writing. I watched her pencil move across the page, and I thought she's building a record of the world as she understands it. She doesn't know that her observations about late-night garage calls and women with babies are anything more than interesting things that happened. She doesn't know that someday, maybe soon, the dates and names in that purple diary might matter in ways neither of us can predict, or that those small details could become the difference between truth and a perfectly constructed lie. Have you ever watched a child write in a diary and thought she's constructing the only version of events that no one thought to tamper with? I had war rooms and forensic audits and a former federal prosecutor on retainer. And a 10-year-old girl with a purple pencil was doing exactly what I was doing, recording the truth before someone could rewrite it. I made her a second cup of apple juice. We sat together for another 20 minutes. She showed me a drawing of our cat. We don't have a cat, which she informed me we should fix immediately, and then Celeste came to take her home. I kissed Ren's forehead at the door. She clutched the diary against her chest like a shield, as if she already understood its value, even if she couldn't yet name it. The next afternoon, the second category arrived colder, sharper, and far less innocent. Friday, October 4th, 2:23 p.m. I was standing at my corner office window on the 47th floor, coffee in hand, watching the elevator bank through the glass partition. The doors opened and Ethan stepped out. His phone was already at his ear. He stood in the corridor between the elevator and my office, 20 feet of open space visible through floor-to-ceiling glass, and listened. 90 seconds, I counted. Not casually, not out of boredom, but with the quiet precision of a man who knows that time is often the first anomaly. His expression didn't change. Not a twitch, not a blink, not a shift in posture. He hung up, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and walked into my office as if nothing had happened. "Weekly perimeter audit is clean," he said. "No anomalies on the server access log since Tuesday. Routine. Professional. Exactly the briefing I would expect from a man I'd trusted for 8 years. Except, I had seen the screen of his phone for half a second as he raised it to his ear, and the area code was 713, Houston. I've trusted Ethan Cole for 8 years. He redesigned our entire internal security architecture. He has access to every server, every access log, every encrypted file in the building. But in my industry, trust is not a feeling. It's a load-bearing calculation, and every calculation requires periodic testing under stress. I didn't ask about the call. I didn't mention the area code. I didn't let my eyes move to his phone pocket or my voice shift by a single degree. I sat behind my desk, listened to his briefing, asked 2 routine follow-up questions about the firewall update, and thanked him. Here is what I was thinking. If Ethan is compromised confronting him, now alerts whoever is on the other end of that Houston line. The enemy learns I'm watching. The leaks get sealed, not fixed. Sealed, and the evidence goes underground where I can't reach it. If Ethan is loyal, if that call was personal or unrelated, or part of something I don't yet understand, then questioning him insults a man who has earned my trust through 8 years of flawless work. Either way, the protocol is the same. You don't pull a suspect cable until you've traced which circuit it feeds. Ethan left my office at 2:41 p.m. I watched him walk back to the elevator, shoulders straight, pace steady. The posture of a man with nothing to hide, or a man trained to appear exactly that way. I noted 3 things in my mental log that Friday evening Houston area code. 90 seconds. 0 expression change. I didn't write them down. I didn't call Prescott. I filed them the way I file every anomaly in a system I built, carefully, silently, and with the understanding that the answer would either vindicate the most trusted man on my team or reveal the price someone had put on his loyalty. And I was willing to wait. Because patience is not passivity. Patience is the decision to let the data accumulate until the pattern is undeniable and then act with the full weight of certainty instead of the recklessness of suspicion. The anomaly I had filed on Friday didn't resolve itself over the weekend, but a different one, older, deeper, and far more painful, surfaced on Saturday night from the last person I expected. My wife and I have been married for 42 years, and in all that time, Lorraine has only sat beside me without speaking first 3 times. The night her mother died. The morning of September 11th. And this Saturday in October. After Celeste and Garrison had taken Ren home, and the mansion was quiet, and the only sound was Manhattan humming through the windows, the way it always does, indifferent, relentless, alive. She sat down on the sofa next to me at 11 o'clock. Her chamomile tea was on the side table untouched, going cold. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the floor. "I need to tell you something." I waited. In 42 years, I have learned that when Lorraine folds her hands, the thing she's about to say has been sitting in her chest for a long time. And the best thing I can do is be still and let it come out at whatever speed it needs. 2 summers ago, she said. The Hamptons. I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water. The garage door was cracked open and I heard Garrison whispering on the phone. She paused. Her voice dropped to barely above a breath. He said, I can't meet you there. My wife is right upstairs. The living room was very quiet. The lamp cast a circle of warm light that stopped at our knees. Beyond it, the rest of the room was dark. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, she said. I didn't have proof. I didn't want to break Celeste's heart over something I wasn't sure about. I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe I heard it wrong. She hadn't heard it wrong. We both knew that. I took her hand. Her fingers were cold. 42 years of marriage means you know the difference between a woman who is scared and a woman who has been carrying something too heavy for too long. Lorraine wasn't scared. She was exhausted. You protect your daughter, I said, and I will protect both of you. She nodded. She picked up her tea. She didn't drink it. That night, Lorraine went to sleep first. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city through the window, feeling the cold sheets against my back. I wasn't angry with her. How could I be? She had done what any mother would do, held the suspicion alone, rather than detonate it inside her daughter's marriage without evidence. The instinct was sound. The calculation was sound. She just didn't have what I had: a metadata trail, a forensic team, and the cold certainty that Garrison's whispered phone call in the garage was not an affair. It was a status report. I was angry with myself. 2 years. She had known for 2 years, and I hadn't seen it. In her eyes, hadn't read it in her posture. Hadn't noticed the way she watched Garrison at dinner tables and holiday gatherings. I had been blind, and in my business, blindness has a cost measured in millions. I closed my eyes and made a promise to the ceiling never again. Monday morning, Prescott's apartment. The espresso machine hissed its familiar sound, and the brownstone smelled like dark roast and old paper. But this time, there was a new document on the table, a forensic accountant's report, 12 pages delivered over the weekend. 3 shell companies across 3 countries. Millions moving through the financial system like current through a buried wire, invisible, until you knew exactly where to dig. The forensic team had traced the offshore account through a Delaware LLC to a Cayman shell corporation to a Singapore holding company. Each layer designed to obscure the one beneath it. Each one peeled back by a team that Prescott had retained at my instruction the week before. The origin sat at the bottom of page 9 in a font no different from any other line on the page. A Houston Trust. Registered under a name I had not spoken in 20 years. Prescott set his coffee down and looked at me. Do you know this man? I was silent for 30 seconds. Not because I was thinking, because I was remembering, and the memory hit me like a voltage spike from a transformer I thought had been decommissioned decades ago. I know him, I said. We built a project together 20 years ago. It failed. He lost $120 million and blamed it on me. Prescott's pen stopped moving. Is he the kind of man who holds a grudge? He's the kind of man who builds a 20-year plan around one. Desmond Blackwood? I hadn't spoken that name in 2 decades. The last time I heard it, we were standing in a Houston hotel conference room in the spring of 2004. And he was pointing at me across a mahogany table, telling me I had destroyed his life. He was wrong, then the project failed because of a design flaw I caught before it killed people. And killing the project was the right call, even though it cost us both. But Desmond didn't see it that way. Desmond saw a man who had taken his money, his reputation, and his future in the Texas energy market and walked away clean. He had spent 20 years making sure that this time, through my son-in-law, through my company, through my family, he wouldn't be the one who walked away with nothing. He wanted me to feel what he felt in that Houston conference room. He wanted me to lose everything. I looked at Prescott across the table. The forensic report sat between us like a map of a battlefield neither of us had known existed until now. Tell me everything, Prescott said. So I did. Prescott asked me to tell him everything. So I went back 20 years to the spring when I shook hands with a man who would spend the next 2 decades planning to destroy me. Have you ever made a decision that saved 1,000 lives and destroyed one man's future and spent 20 years wondering if he would come back for you? I have, and now I had my answer. Spring 2004, Houston, Texas. I was 49 years old, and Whitfield Grid Systems was 7 years into its expansion across the eastern seaboard. A Houston energy executive named Desmond Blackwood approached me at an industry conference with a proposal, a joint venture to build a smart grid prototype for the state of Texas. The contract was worth $340 million. Desmond was 64 now, but back then he was 44, sharp, ambitious CEO of Blackwood Energy Partners, and convinced that Texas was the next frontier for grid modernization. He was right about that. He was wrong about nearly everything else. Desmond put in $120 million of his family's capital. I invested $40 million of mine. We assembled a joint engineering team, leased office space in downtown Houston, and spent 4 months designing the architecture for a grid that would power 4 million homes across Central and South Texas. 6 months in, my engineering team found the flaw. It was in the low distribution architecture, a cascading vulnerability in the way the system balanced demand across substations during peak usage. Under normal conditions, the grid would perform flawlessly. Under stress, a heat wave, a cold snap, any event that pushed demand past 87% capacity, the system would cascade fail. Substations would trip in sequence like dominoes. 4 million homes would go dark, and depending on the season, people would die. I ran the simulations 3 times. I brought in 2 independent consultants. The flaw was structural. It couldn't be patched. It had to be redesigned from the foundation, which meant killing the project, returning the state's funding commitment, and absorbing the losses. I made the call. I lost $40 million. Desmond lost $120 million, his family's confidence and his reputation in the Texas energy market. The project's collapse made industry news for a week and then disappeared, the way failed ventures do when nobody dies and nobody goes to jail. But Desmond didn't disappear. Let me tell you what happens when you stop a project that would have failed catastrophically. The people you saved never know your name. The 4 million homeowners who would have lost power during a Texas summer never sent a thank you note. The engineers who would have been blamed for the cascade failure never knew how close they came. But the man who lost his money, he remembers your name every single day. He wakes up with it. He goes to sleep with it. And if he's the kind of man Desmond Blackwood is, he spends 20 years turning that name into a target. I told Prescott all of this in his study on an October morning, while the espresso went cold and the wall clock ticked through 2 hours without either of us noticing. Prescott wrote 3 pages of notes. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back. The forensic team found something else, he said. The money flowing through those shell companies, the offshore account, the payments to Garrison, there's no return channel, no profit mechanism, no revenue stream flowing back to Blackwood. I waited. He's not trying to steal your technology, Prescott said. He's not trying to make money. He's spending millions to destroy you. And a man who doesn't care about profit is the most dangerous kind of enemy because there's no number that makes him stop. I already knew that. I had known it since 2004, standing in a Houston conference room with grid blueprints spread across a mahogany table, watching Desmond point at me and say words I can still hear 20 years later. You destroyed me. You took my money, my name, and my future in this market, and you walked away clean. He was wrong. The project failed because of a design flaw that would have killed people. Killing it was the right call. I would make the same decision today. But Desmond didn't see a man who saved 4 million homes from a blackout. He saw a man who had sabotaged him deliberately to take the Texas market for himself. And a man who believes he's been cheated doesn't need proof. He needs time. 20 years of time. Desmond Blackwood didn't attack my grid from the outside. An external assault would have triggered every security protocol I'd built, firewalls, monitoring systems, access controls designed to detect exactly the kind of intrusion a competitor might attempt. He knew that. He knew it because he'd watched me build those systems in 2004, sat in the same engineering meetings, studied the same architecture diagrams. He knew my defenses because he'd been inside them once. So he found the one cable I never thought to monitor, the one connection I never stress tested, the one node in my entire system that I had welcomed through the front door, given a seat at the family table, and trusted with my daughter's future. My son-in-law, Prescott, looked at me across the table. The forensic report sat between us. The espresso was cold. The clock read 11:47 a.m., and neither of us had moved in an hour. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to do what I should have done in 2004, I said. Finish it. But this time, I'm not just going to stop the project. I'm going to dismantle the man who built it. Prescott nodded. He picked up his pen. And for the first time in 20 years, the name Desmond Blackwood was not a memory. It was an objective. Dismantling a man requires knowing what he thinks he owns. And the first thing I needed Desmond to believe he owned was my technology. Ethan Cole placed a single sheet of paper on my desk. The next morning, a server access log with 3 dates circled in red and waited for me to smile. I did. 3 downloads, Ethan said. 847 files. He accessed the Core Grid R&D package on July 12th, August 29th, and September 18th. Each time within 48 hours of a planning meeting, each time using credentials that should have been restricted to senior engineering staff. Ethan stood in the server room doorway with green lights blinking behind him and the hum of the building's infrastructure vibrating through the floor. He was waiting for outrage. He got something else. Do you remember when I asked you to create a secondary R&D partition 8 months ago? I said. Ethan nodded slowly. I called it Project Decoy. I told you it was a sandbox environment for testing prototype architectures. It wasn't. It was a mirror of our real R&D folder, 847 files of technically convincing smart grid architecture that contains a series of fatal design flaws embedded at the load distribution level, convincing enough to pass a surface review, catastrophic if anyone tries to build it. Ethan stared at me. In 8 years of working together, I had never seen his composure falter. It faltered now, just for a moment, just a flicker behind the eyes before he brought it back under control. You built a trap, he said, 8 months ago, when the first suspicions formed, before I had proof, before the Hamptons, before any of this. And Garrison has been stealing from the trap the entire time. Every byte he sent to Houston is designed to fail. The man on the other end, and now we know his name, is sitting in a corner office right now, believing he has the keys to my company. He's holding a blueprint that will collapse the moment anyone tries to build from it. Ethan was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he said something I didn't expect. You didn't tell me. No. Why? Because 8 months ago, I didn't know who was compromised and who wasn't. I couldn't afford to trust anyone, including you. He absorbed that. He didn't like it, but he understood it. Because Ethan Cole spent 12 years at the FBI, and he knows that operational security sometimes means the people you trust most are the last to know. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in knowing your enemy spent months stealing something you built specifically for him to steal. But, let me be clear, satisfaction is not the same as safety. Desmond had my fake technology, but he also had my son-in-law. And the next piece of intelligence that landed on Prescott's desk the following day proved that Desmond's grip on Garrison went far deeper than corporate espionage. October 10th, Prescott's apartment. A private investigator's report sat on the table between us, 43 pages bound in a manila folder, with a red confidential stamp that Prescott's firm used for cases involving potential criminal referral. The woman's name was Tatiana Frost, 34 years old, recruited by Desmond's organization 18 months earlier, paid $180,000 through a subsidiary of Blackwood Energy to approach Garrison at an industry event in Chicago, initiate a relationship, and create a dependency that would ensure his continued cooperation. The relationship, the late-night video calls Wren had witnessed through the garage door, the woman with the baby, and the child, I asked. Prescott turned to page 31 of the report. A DNA analysis obtained through legal discovery channels. Not Garrison's, he said. The biological father is a former Blackwood Energy field technician named Reed Holloway. The entire thing was manufactured, the approach, the relationship, the pregnancy. Garrison was trapped before he knew there was a trap. Reed Holloway, a name that appeared nowhere else in our investigation. A man who existed only as a line on a DNA report the real father of a child that Desmond had used as a chain around my son-in-law's neck. I sat in Prescott's leather chair, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, pity. Not forgiveness, pity. My son-in-law isn't a good man. He stole from my company. He lied to my daughter. He betrayed every trust I placed in him over 12 years. But standing in that apartment, reading about the woman who was paid to seduce him and the child who was staged to imprison him, I thought, he's not entirely evil either. He's weak. And Desmond Blackwood is very, very good at finding weak people. Desmond hadn't just recruited a spy. He had manufactured a human cage, a fake relationship, a fake child, a fake future, and locked Garrison inside it so completely that the only way out was to keep stealing, keep lying, keep betraying the family that trusted him. It was elegant in its cruelty. It was also, I recognized with a chill that settled behind my ribs, the work of a man who had no limits. Prescott closed the investigator's file and looked at me over his reading glasses. Yes, this isn't corporate espionage anymore, he said. This is a man who spent $180,000 to manufacture a human being's entire emotional reality. A fake relationship, a fake child, a fake future, just to own your son-in-law. What do you think he'll do when he finds out the technology is fake too? I didn't answer, because the answer was the reason I hadn't slept in 5 days. Desmond Blackwood wasn't fighting for money. He wasn't fighting for market share. He was fighting because 20 years ago, I took something from him that no amount of money could replace his belief that he was the smartest man in the room. And a man like that doesn't stop when the plan fails. He escalates. The question wasn't whether Desmond would discover the trap. The question was what he would burn on the way down. What Desmond would burn and when was a question I couldn't answer yet. But on October 12th, while I was still calculating his next move, my daughter found the fire on her own. She found out the truth about her husband the way most people find out the truth about anything. Not when they go looking for it, but when it appears on a screen they weren't supposed to see. At a moment no one planned, October 12th, a Saturday evening. Garrison was in the bathroom, shower running. His phone was on the bed face up, because men who are careless about one thing are usually careless about everything. It buzzed once. Celeste glanced at it the way you glance at anything that makes a sound in a quiet room. The sender line read TF. The preview text read, "My baby and I need to see you." Celeste told me later that she didn't open the message. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't touch it. She stood at the edge of the bed for what she estimated was 10 seconds, though. She said it felt like an hour, and then she walked to the living room window overlooking Park Avenue and sat in the dark. 40 minutes, no lights, no phone call, no crying. Just a woman sitting in a chair staring at a city that didn't know her marriage had just ended. At 10:47 p.m., she called me. 3 words, "Dad, I know." Her voice was steady, hollow like a pipe that's been emptied of everything it was designed to carry, but steady. She didn't cry. That scared me more than the crying would have, because tears mean the body is processing grief, and silence means it hasn't started yet. "Come to the house tomorrow morning," I said, "early, before he wakes up." "Okay." "Celeste." "Yes." "Don't say anything to him tonight. Not a word. Can you do that?" 4 seconds of silence. Then, "I've been sleeping next to a stranger for months, Dad. One more night won't kill me. Let me tell you what my daughter did that night." She hung up the phone. She went back to the bedroom. She climbed into bed beside a man she now knew was lying to her about everything, and she closed her eyes and pretended to sleep until his breathing changed, and she knew he was unconscious. She lay in the dark for hours listening to him breathe, the man she had married, the father of her child, the person she had trusted with her entire life, and she didn't make a sound. That composure, that refusal to break, told me more about who my daughter had become than anything I had ever taught her. She arrived at the mansion at 6:15 the next morning. October, chill in the air, the first real cold of autumn. I had coffee ready. She didn't drink it. She sat at the kitchen island with her hands flat on the marble and looked at me with eyes that had spent the night burning through every assumption she had ever made about her husband. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her it wasn't just an affair. I told her about the encrypted emails routed through Houston. I told her about the offshore account millions funneled through shell companies. I told her about the man in Houston who had spent 20 years building this attack. And I told her about the woman that she was planted, recruited, paid, that the child wasn't Garrison's, that the entire relationship was manufactured to trap him. Celeste listened without interruption. Her hands stayed flat on the marble. Her jaw was set. Her eyes didn't leave mine. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. The coffee machine had cycled off. October light came through the east windows in long, thin bars. She asked one question. "What do you need me to do? Could you do it? Could you sleep in the same bed as someone who sold your father's company to his worst enemy? Smile over breakfast. Ask about their day. Kiss your daughter goodnight beside them for 4 weeks because the plan requires it. Could you perform the role of a wife who doesn't know when you know everything? Because the alternative is tipping off the man who would warn the enemy and collapse the entire operation. Live normally," I said. 4 weeks. Don't let him see that anything has changed. Don't alter your routine. Don't search his phone. Don't confront him. 4 weeks, and then it will be over." She looked at me for a long time. Not at my words at me. Reading my face the way Lorraine reads it. The way women in my family have learned to read the faces of men who build systems and hide their feelings inside engineering metaphors. 4 weeks, she said. She nodded once. The nod was her mother's firm final, the kind that closes a door and doesn't look back. I put my hand over hers on the marble countertop. Her fingers were ice cold. She didn't pull away. We sat like that for 30 seconds, father and daughter alone in a kitchen, with a plan between us that would require her to do the hardest thing I've ever asked anyone to do. Then she stood up. She straightened her coat. She picked up her bag. "I'll see you Sunday for dinner," she said. "With him, and I will be perfect." She walked out of my kitchen and went home to her husband. She made dinner that night. She asked about his day. She bathed Wren and read her a bedtime story and climbed into bed beside a man she now knew was a traitor, a liar, and someone else's weapon. 4 weeks of that. I had asked my daughter to be the bravest person in this entire operation, and she agreed before I finished the sentence. But what I didn't know yet was that Desmond was about to make those 4 weeks much harder than either of us had planned. Desmond made those 4 weeks harder on the 5th day by opening a second front I should have anticipated, but didn't. 5 days after Celeste agreed to live in silence, Desmond Blackwood aimed his next attack at the heartbeat of my company, the Texas Contract. And the weapon he used to do it was the same fake data I had built for him to steal. October 18th. The 47th floor conference room. Ethan stood at the screen with a Texas state grid map glowing behind him. 14 coverage zones, each one a different shade of green representing our operational footprint. Prescott sat to my left with his legal pad and his Mont Blanc, and the expression he wears when he knows the situation has escalated beyond civil litigation. 3 Texas Energy Board members contacted in the last 10 days, Ethan said. Each received a 60-page technical report alleging cascade failure risk in our smart grid architecture. The report claims our load distribution system will fail under peak demand, the exact scenario we identified and fixed in the original design 15 years ago. He paused. The source data in the report matches Project Decoy exactly. Every chart, every simulation, every failure mode projection. He's using the files Garrison stole. Prescott leaned forward. He's using our own fake data to kill the biggest contract in our history. I looked at the Texas map on the screen. The contract deadline was November 15th, 28 days away. 3 board members wavering. A 60-page technical report sitting on their desks that looked professional, looked credible, looked like the work of a legitimate competitor concerned about public safety. It was none of those things. It was a weapon built from stolen blueprints that I had designed to be stolen, and the man firing it didn't know the ammunition was blank. "He's fighting 2 fronts at once," I said. "Good, so am I. In the grid business, we call it a 2-bus fault, when failures hit 2 independent systems at the same time. A compromised employee stealing data on 1 bus. A lobby attack against your largest contract on the other. Most grids aren't built to survive a simultaneous 2-bus fault. Mine is. I designed it that way 35 years ago. And I designed my response to Desmond the same way redundant systems isolated circuits and the patience to let the fault reveal its full scope before I shut it down. Prescott asked the question that mattered. Can you counter the Texas report before the deadline? The report is based on decoy architecture. I can produce the real specifications, peer-reviewed, field-tested, operational for 11 years, and demonstrate that the technical flaws in his report don't exist in our actual system. The board members will see it for what it is, a fabricated attack using data that was never real. And the source? We don't name the source yet, not until we're ready to file. For now, we discredit the data and let Desmond think his report failed on its merits. He'll double down. They always do. Ethan nodded. Prescott wrote 3 lines on his legal pad. The conference room coffee had gone cold an hour ago, and nobody had noticed. The next day, the second bus faulted exactly on schedule. October 19th, 2:32 p.m. I was sitting in my corner office watching the server access log on my secondary monitor, a feed Ethan had configured to alert me whenever certain partitions were accessed. The screen blinked. A new entry appeared. Garrison's credentials accessing the decoy partition for the 4th time. But this time was different. This time, the file he downloaded was one I had placed there specifically for this moment, a document labeled as the final consolidated blueprint of Whitfield Grid's next-generation architecture. It was 64 pages of technically beautiful, structurally useless design work, and embedded in every layer of that document in the metadata, in the image files, and the font encoding. In the PDF structure itself was a tracking signature that would log every server, every inbox, and every device the file touched from the moment it left my building. Have you ever watched someone steal from you in real time and felt nothing but patience, not anger, not satisfaction, just the calm, measured awareness that every second they spend taking what they think is yours is another second of evidence you'll use to take everything that's actually theirs? I watched the log. At 2:32 p.m. Garrison downloaded the file. At 2:49 p.m., 17 minutes later, the file was transmitted via encrypted email to a Houston IP address. My son-in-law didn't even wait for the coffee to cool. The metadata pinged its first waypoint at 2:51 p.m., a server in Delaware, then a relay in the Cayman Islands, then Houston, the same path the money had traveled in reverse. I picked up my phone and called Prescott. "The trap has been triggered," I said. "How fast can you prepare the filing documents? How clean is the trail? The server log, download, timestamp, transmission record, and metadata tracking across 3 jurisdictions. Every waypoint logged, every hop recorded." Prescott was quiet for a moment. Then, "Give me 2 weeks. You have 27 days. The Texas deadline is our deadline too." I hung up and looked at the server log one more time. The metadata had settled in Houston, inside a system registered to Blackwood Energy Partners. The file was there. The tracking was active. And Desmond Blackwood was about to receive what he believed was the core technology of my company. He would study it. He would celebrate it. He would feed it to his lobbyists and his engineers and his lawyers, confident he finally had the weapon to end me. He didn't know that every byte of that data carried a hidden pulse, and I was tracking his every move the way I track current through a grid, silently, precisely, and with the absolute certainty that the circuit always leads back to the source. The tracking pulse was live. Every server the file touched, every inbox it landed in, every device that opened it, logged, time-stamped, mapped. Desmond was building his case against me with data I had designed to betray him. But the next piece of the puzzle didn't come from a server or a metadata trail. It came from a purple diary. How far would you go to protect your family? Would you use your 10-year-old granddaughter's words to build a legal case against her own father? I didn't have an answer on October 21st. Prescott did. He was cross-referencing the evidence timeline at his apartment, every date, every email, every server access log, pinned to a master chronology spread across his dining table. He had been at it for 6 hours when he stopped, tapped his pen against a blank space on the page, and looked up at me. "October 2nd, he said, "It's empty." "What do you mean?" "No email traffic, no phone log, no server access, no surveillance. But you told me Garrison had a visitor at the apartment that day, someone connected to the Houston operation. I have nothing to corroborate it. If this goes to court, October 2nd is a gap the defense will drive a truck through." He paused. His pen tapped the blank date again. "Did your granddaughter write anything about a stranger visiting the house?" I knew the answer before he finished the question. I had read the entry 2 weeks earlier, sitting on the sofa beside Wren, while she drew pictures of a cat we don't have. I had turned the page and seen it, her purple pencil handwriting, slightly crooked the letters of a girl who writes carefully because she wants to remember. "A strange man came today. Dad took him into his study and wouldn't let me in." I recited it from memory. Prescott's pen stopped moving. She wrote that in her diary with a purple pencil. Sterling, my granddaughter, 10 years old. "It fills the hole," he said quietly. "It's not primary evidence, it's a corroborating timeline entry. A child's contemporaneous observation matching a date we can't cover any other way. No court will ignore it, and no grandfather should have to use it." The apartment was very quiet. Prescott's espresso had gone cold an hour ago. Manhattan traffic hummed somewhere far below, indifferent to the moral calculation happening in a brownstone study on the Upper West Side. It took me 2 days to decide. I went back and forth, the engineer in me demanding the cleanest possible evidence chain, the grandfather in me recoiling from the idea of entering a child's private thoughts into a legal proceeding. Finally, I asked Wren, "Can I keep your diary safe for a while, just in case?" She looked at me with those serious brown eyes. "Okay, Grandpa, but you can't read the part I wrote about you." I promised, and I kept my word. I only read the entries that mattered to the case and none of the ones that mattered to her. Prescott photographed the October 2nd entry, documented the chain of custody, and returned the diary to me within 48 hours. It sits in my desk drawer, now purple cover, silver clasp. A 10-year-old girl's record of the world as she understands it, evidence and innocence, bound in the same cover. While I was wrestling with a diary in New York, something was happening 1,200 miles south that I wouldn't learn about for 3 more weeks. October 23rd, Houston. The 32nd floor of Blackwood Energy Partners headquarters. The building was mostly dark, it was past 7, and the executive floor had emptied hours ago. But one office still had its light on. Sophia Ashford, 39 years old, Desmond Blackwood's senior executive assistant, sat alone at her desk with her laptop open to a folder she had been building for 18 months. I would learn her name later. I would learn what she did later. But this is where it started, in a quiet office in Houston, with a woman who had spent a year and a half saving every email, every directive, every payment instruction her boss had ever issued regarding the operation against my company. 2,847 emails, organized by date, cross-referenced by subject. Every instruction Desmond had given about approaching Garrison, staging the woman lobbying Texas, and planning the blame chain that would protect him if everything collapsed. Sophia didn't know who to give them to, not yet. She only knew that the previous week, Desmond had used the phrase acceptable losses in a meeting, and he had been looking at a personnel file when he said it. The file belonged to the woman he had paid to seduce my son-in-law. Sophia understood what acceptable losses meant when a man like Desmond said it. It meant someone was about to be sacrificed. She closed the laptop. She picked up her bag. She drank the last of her vending machine water flat lukewarm. The taste of a woman who had stayed 3 hours past, quitting time, carrying a secret that could end her career or save her conscience. She went home. But she didn't delete the folder. There are 2 kinds of people loyal to dangerous men: those who don't know what their boss truly is, and those who know exactly what he is, but wait for the right moment to prove they aren't the same kind of person. Sophia Ashford was the second kind, and Desmond Blackwood had no idea she existed, not as a threat, not as a witness, not as anything more than the woman who managed his calendar and ordered his lunch. In New York, I held my granddaughter's diary and weighed justice against innocence. In Houston, a woman I had never met held thousands of emails and weighed loyalty against survival. Neither of us knew the other existed yet. But history has a way of proving what I've learned in 35 years of building systems. The most dangerous failures don't come from the outside. They come from the inside. And bad guys always burn themselves from the inside out. The inside-out collapse I was counting on hadn't started yet, but 3 days later, I sat down to design the mechanism that would make it inevitable. October 26th, Prescott's apartment. No phones on the table, no laptops, no legal pads. Just 3 men, a bottle of Macallan that nobody touched, and the smell of old leather and cold espresso in a brownstone study where the curtains were drawn at 10 in the morning. I laid out the 2-layer plan. Layer 1, plant a fabricated regulatory filing on the shared server partition, the same partition Garrison had been accessing for months. The filing would contain what appeared to be a critical vulnerability in our Texas contract application, a transposed date. A misreported compliance test, the kind of clerical error that looks like a gift to anyone trying to sabotage us. Garrison would find it. Garrison would relay it to Houston, and Desmond would use it to lobby the Texas board harder, believing he finally had a legitimate weapon. The filing is bait, I said. It only matters if someone tries to weaponize it. If Garrison reads it and does nothing, no harm. The trap only activates on aggression. Prescott tapped his finger against the edge of the bare table. And layer 2, a recorded meeting. The Pierre Hotel. We arranged for Garrison to meet Desmond's representative, the handoff captured on audio and video. Ethan sets the equipment. We get the exchange on record. Stolen intelligence being delivered to a known agent of a hostile competitor. Prescott was quiet for a long time. The Macallan sat between us, amber in the low light untouched. One contaminated step, he said, and every piece of evidence after it is inadmissible. Every single one. You understand that? One procedural error, and this entire operation, 7 months of work, becomes useless in court. That's why I need you to design each step. I built the grid. You build the legal architecture around it. Ethan leaned forward. The server partition is ready. I can plant the filing tomorrow. The Pierre setup needs 2 weeks room booking equipment placement sightlines. I'll need a cover identity for the reservation. You'll have it, Prescott said. He uncapped his pen for the first time that morning and began writing on the bare table with his finger, tracing invisible steps in the air above the wood. It was how he thought I had watched him do it for 26 years. Prescott opened his hall closet to get our coats when the meeting ended, and I saw a framed photograph on the shelf inside Eleanor Prescott, his late wife, at a 2011 charity gala, silver dress, champagne glass, laughing at someone off camera. Prescott caught me looking. "She would have hated this," he said. I waited. She also would have lost. Neither of us smiled. The closet closed. We shook hands at the door, and I walked out into an October morning that smelled like dying leaves and diesel exhaust, knowing that the next 20 days would determine whether my family survived intact or shattered into pieces no engineer could reassemble. 2 days later, Sunday dinner, the Upper East Side mansion. Lorraine cooked lamb with rosemary, a recipe she's made for 30 years. The one she makes when she wants the house to feel normal, even when nothing is. Celeste arrived with Garrison and Wren at 6. She was perfect. She kissed her husband at the door. She handed Lorraine the wine. She laughed at Garrison's joke about a client who couldn't read a contract, but she didn't refill his glass when it was empty. She didn't lean into him when he put his arm on her chair. And when I asked casually the way you ask about weather, "How's the Texas situation?" Garrison. Her eyes moved to his face half a second before his answer, watching for the micro-expression she now knew to look for. Garrison noticed. Not all of it, not the architecture of what was happening around him, but something. He was quieter than usual. He watched me across the table the way I had watched him at the Hamptons, not with suspicion exactly, but with the low hum of a system that knows something is drawing power it shouldn't be drawing. Wren sat at the end of the table eating her lamb and telling Lorraine about a school project on electricity. "Grandpa, did you know that Benjamin Franklin didn't actually discover electricity?" I said I did know that, and she informed me that I should tell more people because it was important. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand. Lorraine stood beside me, drying. 2 minutes of silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that holds weight without breaking. "He looked at you like he was counting something," she said. I kept scrubbing. He was. Counting what? Exits. Garrison excused himself at 8:47 p.m. to take a call. He stepped onto the terrace overlooking Park Avenue, gripped the cold iron railing, and lowered his voice. Celeste told me later that she watched him through the glass from the hallway, his posture rigid, his free hand clenched at his side. I would learn what he said on that call weeks later, when the evidence chain was complete. He called Desmond directly. "I think something's wrong," he said. "Celeste is different. Her father looked at me tonight like he was reading a diagnostic." Desmond's response was 2 words: "You're paranoid." Then he told Garrison to continue. The Texas contract was too close to stop now. Desmond hung up, and in doing so, he made the mistake that would cost him everything, because Garrison wasn't paranoid. He was the first person in Desmond's entire operation to feel the current shifting. And Desmond had just told him to ignore it. I filed that away like every other data point. Garrison is more sensitive than Desmond thinks. And the gap between what the soldier sees and what the general dismisses is exactly where wars are lost. The gap between what the soldier sees and what the general dismisses, that's where Desmond lost this war. But what happened 2 days later proves something else entirely. The gap between what money can buy and what loyalty actually costs. Ethan Cole closed my office door at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning and turned the lock. In 8 years of working together, he had never locked my door. I set down my coffee and watched him walk to my desk with a laptop under his arm and an expression I had never seen on his face. Not fear, not anger, but the controlled intensity of a man who has been carrying something heavy and is about to set it down. He placed the laptop on my desk, opened it, and turned the screen toward me. A wire transfer confirmation, $2.5 million. Deposited 2 days earlier from a Delaware LLC. I recognized the same shell company in the forensic chain that connected to Houston. The receiving account belonged to Ethan Cole. "They deposited it Tuesday," he said. "I haven't touched a cent." He reached into his jacket and produced a USB drive, which he set beside the laptop. 14 emails, 3 encrypted messages. 1 recorded phone call. I recorded it myself. The broker who contacted me works for Blackwood's Delaware subsidiary. On the call, he names you specifically as the target. He says the objective is to gain access to your internal security protocols and disable the server monitoring before November 15th. My hand was on the armrest of my chair. I realized I was gripping it. I let go. I need you to see how far they're willing to go, Ethan said, and I need you to know I'm not that kind of person. The office was quiet. Morning light cut through the 47th floor windows and fell across the desk between us in long white bars. The coffee I had poured 10 minutes ago sat untouched, going cold. Somewhere in the building, the HVAC system hummed at its steady 62 hertz, the frequency I had specified when we built this floor, because it matches the resonance of a properly balanced grid, and I find it calming. I did not find it calming now. You could have taken it, I said. You could have disappeared. I could have. Why didn't you? Ethan looked at me steadily. Because 21 years ago, someone I never identified paid my MIT tuition 3 weeks before classes started. The financial aid office told me it was a clerical correction. I never believed that, but I never found out who it was, and eventually I stopped looking because it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone believed I was worth investing in before I had proven anything. I've spent my career trying to be worth that investment. How much does it cost to buy a man's soul? Desmond Blackwood thought the answer was $2.5 million. But he made the same mistake every man makes. When he measures loyalty in dollars, he forgot that some debts aren't financial, they're structural. They're built into the foundation of who a person became, and no wire transfer can overwrite them. I was quiet for a long time. Then I said something I had never told anyone. It's September 2003. Your scholarship was revoked 3 weeks before classes started. You had a thesis proposal on power systems architecture that your advisor sent to 6 industry contacts. I was one of them. I read it on a Tuesday night and called the MIT financial aid office on Wednesday morning. Ethan stared at me. You thought it was a clerical correction? It wasn't. I saw a 20-year-old kid with an idea that could reshape how grids balance load across distributed networks, and I made a bet. 21 years, Ethan said. His voice was different now, lower, tighter, the voice of a man processing something that was rearranging the architecture of his own story. You let me believe it was a mistake for 21 years. I didn't pay for your loyalty, Ethan. I paid for your future. What you did with it was always yours. Ethan sat perfectly still for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he took off his glasses, pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose, and said nothing. The HVAC hummed. The coffee went cold. Manhattan spread out below us through the glass, 8 million people running on systems designed by men like us, people who would never know our names or care about our debts, living their lives on a grid that works, because someone somewhere made an investment nobody asked them to make. Some silences are louder than any conversation. This one said everything about the kind of man I had bet on 2 decades ago, and everything about the kind of man Desmond had just tried and failed to buy. Ethan put his glasses back on. He closed the laptop. He stood up. What do you need me to do with the evidence? Prescott, tomorrow morning, bring everything, the transfer, the emails, the recording. All of it. Done. He walked to the door, unlocked it, and paused with his hand on the frame. And for what it's worth, he said, without turning around, the thesis worked. The load balancing model I proposed at MIT is still running in 11 of your 14 state grids. I know, I said. That's why I made the bet. He left. The door closed. I sat alone in my office and looked at the laptop screen, still glowing with a wire transfer that Desmond Blackwood had intended as a purchase. He thought he was buying a spy, someone who would gut my security systems from the inside and leave me blind before the Texas deadline. Instead, he had just handed us 14 emails, 3 encrypted messages, a recorded phone call naming me as the target, and a wire transfer receipt proving criminal intent. He had paid $2.5 million for the evidence that would end him. The boardroom on the 47th floor seated 14 people that morning, but only 3 of us knew that the technical report on the table was built on stolen data, and only one of us had designed the rebuttal that would tear it apart. Prescott had reviewed Ethan's bribe package the previous morning and called it the strongest single piece of evidence in the case. Now, the Pierre Hotel meeting was scheduled. But first, I had a board to save. 2 members of the Texas Energy Board had received a 30-page technical report questioning our safety standards, anonymously delivered, professionally formatted, and entirely fabricated. They sat at the far end of the table with the report open between them, and I could see from their posture that they had believed it. The polished mahogany reflected their concerned faces like a dark mirror. The smell of fresh coffee and printer toner hung in the air. I stood at the head of the table, with the Manhattan skyline behind me, and began. The report cites a January 2024 stress test on our Texas relay infrastructure. I said, tapping the transposed date on the printed page with my index finger. We didn't conduct a January 2024 stress test. No one did, because the relay wasn't installed until March. I clicked the presentation remote. The screen behind me showed our installation timeline, purchase orders, shipping manifests, commissioning logs. Every document time-stamped, every entry verifiable. Page 14 references load-bearing capacity figures from our Permian Basin substation. The figures are accurate to 4 decimal places because they were copied directly from our internal engineering database, but the test conditions described alongside them never existed. The ambient temperature cited was 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Our Permian Basin sensors recorded 78 degrees on every date listed. I let that sit. Coffee cooled in cups nobody was drinking. The boardroom was silent except for the low hum of the climate system and the distant percussion of Manhattan 47 floors below. Whoever authored this report had access to our internal specifications, but not our operational timeline. That's a very specific kind of ignorance. I did not look at Garrison when I said it. I did not need to. I watched his reflection in the glass wall behind the Texas delegates instead, the way I watch a transformer under load. Not for the moment it fails, but for the micro fluctuations that tell you failure is already inevitable and the casing just doesn't know it yet. His knuckles whitened around his pen beneath the table, where he thought no one could see. His face had gone the color of old paper. He offered no rebuttal, no clarification, no eye contact with anyone at the table. Ethan sat 3 chairs to my left, with his laptop open, pulling up corroborating documents each time I cited a discrepancy. We had rehearsed nothing. We didn't need to. The data was the data. NLIs have a specific architecture that collapses the moment you apply structural load to the wrong joint. The 2 Texas delegates exchanged a look. The older one, a woman named Margaret Hale, who had served on the Energy Board for 11 years, closed the falsified report and set her pen on top of it. "We're satisfied," she said. "The contract review will proceed as scheduled." Garrison said nothing for the rest of the meeting. He sat in his chair like a man watching his own sentencing and understanding for the first time that the judge had read every page of the file before the trial began. When the meeting ended, he left without speaking to anyone. The dry metallic taste of a man who knows the walls are closing, I imagined it in his mouth as clearly as I tasted the cold coffee in mine. 2 days later, on a Sunday evening, Celeste called me. It was 9:22 p.m. I was in my study reviewing the evidence timeline Prescott had assembled when my daughter's name lit up my phone screen. "Dad, I just got the strangest call." Her voice carried the careful steadiness of someone processing information faster than she could organize it. A woman, she said her name was Tatiana Frost. She said she knows I'm Garrison's wife. She said she needs to tell me something important, and she can't go to the police. Tatiana Frost, 34 years old. Desmond Blackwood's former personal liaison in New York. The woman whose initials Celeste had found in Garrison's phone weeks earlier. The woman who had been a ghost in our investigation, always referenced never reached. And now she was calling my daughter on a Sunday night with terror in her voice. "Dad," she sounded terrified. She said she can't go to the police. What do I do? Let me tell you something about scared people. They don't call strangers at 9:15 on a Sunday night unless every other door is already locked. Tatiana Frost wasn't switching sides out of conscience. She was switching sides because Desmond had already picked her coffin, and she had just realized she was lying in it. I stepped onto the terrace. Cold November air hit my face, carrying the faint iron scent of the city at night. Below me, the Upper East Side stretched out an amber streetlight, quiet as a held breath. "Meet her," I said. "Listen to everything. Promise her nothing. And Celeste, don't tell her what we know. Let her tell you what she knows." Okay, I can do that." Celeste called me back at 10:40 p.m. Her voice was steady, but her breathing was wrong, too controlled the way people breathe when they're holding back something that terrifies them. I could hear her pressing the phone hard against her ear, the faint creak of pressure against the case. "Dad," she said, "Tatiana wants to meet tomorrow. She says she has documents. And Dad, she's not just scared of Desmond, she's scared of Garrison." The chamomile tea Celeste had been drinking sat abandoned on her kitchen counter, going cold the way coffee had gone cold in my boardroom 2 days earlier. 2 women in 2 rooms, both realizing that the men they had trusted were not the men they thought they knew. Tatiana had no other choice. and she was scared of both the men who had used her. Tatiana Frost arrived at our Upper East Side mansion at exactly 10 a.m., wearing sunglasses she didn't remove for the first 6 minutes. Celeste told me later that when she finally took them off, the bruise under her left eye said more than anything that came out of her mouth. Fear had driven her to call my daughter, but what she carried in a manila folder on our coffee table was something far worse than fear. She sat on the edge of the sofa, gripping her own wrists while she talked, her voice cracking on the words she had clearly rehearsed, but never said aloud before. Celeste poured coffee that Tatiana never touched. It sat on the table going cold beside the folder that contained the architecture of my son-in-law's destruction. "He paid me $180,000, Tatiana said. 3 installments through a company called Ridgemont Holdings. I have every receipt." She opened the folder, bank statements, wire confirmations, a timeline of payments that matched almost to the day the timeline of Garrison's affair. "The baby isn't Garrison's," she said, and placed a DNA test result on top of the receipts. "The DNA test is in this folder. Desmond wanted a pregnancy scare, something to keep Garrison trapped if he ever tried to walk away. The whole thing was engineered. Every dinner, every hotel room, every text message. I was given scripts." Celeste sat across from this woman, a woman who had slept with her husband on assignment and listened without interrupting. I know my daughter. I know the self-control that cost her. Later, she would tell me her hands were shaking under the table the entire time. "Why are you telling me this?" Celeste asked. "I'm the wife." Tatiana's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Because he's going to blame me for everything. Every email, every meeting, every dollar he's building a file that makes it look like I acted alone. And your husband doesn't know he's next." You want to know what that amount of money buys in Manhattan? It buys a woman willing to pretend she loves a man. She despises a fabricated pregnancy scare, and 18 months of someone else's marriage weaponized all so a billionaire in Houston can steal a contract from a man he's hated for 2 decades. It buys disposable people, and Tatiana had just discovered she was one of them. Celeste called me 40 minutes after Tatiana left. "She has everything, Dad, receipts, instructions, the DNA results, and she's terrified." I told Prescott. He told me to get those documents secured immediately. 2 days later, something else arrived. Not through Celeste, not through Prescott, not through any channel we controlled. Tatiana forwarded an encrypted email she had received from an anonymous sender. 6 words. "I am the insider. I have what you need." Prescott traced the metadata within hours. The email originated from an internal server at Blackwood Energy's Houston headquarters. Sophia Ashford, the executive assistant who had been quietly archiving evidence for months, had reached out to Tatiana without knowing who Tatiana was, and without Tatiana knowing who she was. 2 women dismantling the same man's empire from the inside, neither aware the other existed, until an encrypted message crossed the gap between them. "Your anonymous friend is inside Desmond's house," Prescott told me over the phone. "The metadata is clean. This is real. Before I tell you what happened at the Pierre Hotel, before I reveal the recording that would eventually play in a federal courtroom, comment your prediction. Did Garrison know he was being recorded, yes or no? And tell me why you think so." A quick note. The next part includes some recreated details to convey the emotional weight of this moment. The message behind it is what matters. November 9th, the Pierre Hotel, 8 p.m. Ethan had secured the adjacent suite 2 days in advance under a corporate booking that couldn't be traced to us. He sat behind a connecting wall with recording equipment that captured every word spoken in the room where Garrison met Desmond's. Representative, a man in his 50s with a banker's posture and a voice calibrated to reassure without promising anything. "Mr. Blackwood wants you to know the situation is fully managed," the representative said. "Your position within Whitfield Grid is secure. Garrison ordered bourbon and drank it in 1 swallow. The glass hit the table harder than it needed to." "Will he leave me alone after this?" Garrison asked. "When the Texas contract is done, will he let me go?" 3 seconds of silence. Ethan told me later that when Garrison walked out of the Pierre, he didn't hail a cab. He didn't check his phone. He stood on the sidewalk for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Ethan counted from the hotel entrance, staring up at a sky he couldn't see through the light pollution. His hands buried in his coat pockets, the cold November air carrying exhaust and the smell of street vendors closing up for the night. A man searching for something that wasn't there anymore. "Mr. Blackwood values loyalty," the representative had finally answered. "You should continue to demonstrate yours." That was the moment Garrison understood. Not intellectually, he had known for months that he was compromised. But standing on that sidewalk with Manhattan roaring past him and no one coming to tell him it would be okay, he understood it the way a structure understands gravity the instant before it collapses. He was not a partner, he was not protected. He was a tool, and tools get discarded when the job is done. The recording was 47 minutes long. Ethan delivered it to Prescott at midnight. But the moment that mattered wasn't any words spoken. It was those 3 seconds of silence after a man asked to be free and heard the only honest answer he would ever get. On the night before, I dismantled my own family. I sat in a library full of evidence and realized that the hardest part of building a perfect case was remembering that every piece of it used to be a person I loved. The Pierre Hotel recording had been in Prescott's hands for less than 24 hours. 47 minutes of conversation and 3 seconds of silence that confirmed what I already knew. Garrison was disposable, and he was beginning to understand it. Now, I sat alone at the desk where my daughter used to do her homework, surrounded by folders that told the story of 7 weeks I would never get back. The library smelled like aged leather and old wood polish, and the cold coffee I had been drinking since 6 p.m. A clock ticked on the mantel, the same clock Lorraine had chosen when we built this room. Back when this house still felt like a home instead of a command center. She had checked on me an hour earlier, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume and a question she didn't ask. She knew. Wives always know when the machinery has shifted from investigation to execution. I spread the evidence across the desk, the way I lay out engineering schematics and sequence each piece connected to the next, by logic and causation. The fabricated data trap that Ethan had triggered in October, the offshore account traced through 3 shell companies to Houston, the lobby campaign against our Texas contract, dismantled in the boardroom 2 weeks ago. Celeste's cooperation, steady, unflinching, more costly than any dollar amount in these files. Wren's diary entry, sealed under Prescott's legal framework where no courtroom could touch it. The bribe that purchased loyalty instead of betrayal. Tatiana's confession and the DNA results that proved the pregnancy was manufactured. Sophia's anonymous archive routing through encrypted channels from inside the Houston headquarters, and the recording 47 minutes of a man asking to be free and learning that freedom was never part of the arrangement. 7 weeks, 14 people, 4 cities. And it all came down to what I would write on the blank sheet of paper sitting in the center of my desk. I picked up my pen. The scratch of ink on paper sounded louder than it should have in the silence of the library. I wrote one sentence Desmond needs to reveal himself. Garrison is the bait. Do you know what it costs to build a case that will survive federal scrutiny? Destroy a man who has spent 20 years trying to destroy you. Expose your son-in-law as an instrument of that destruction and still protect your granddaughter's name from the public record. It costs everything you thought your family was, and you pay it alone. In a library at midnight with a pen in your hand and a sentence that will burn before morning. Prescott had designed the legal architecture. Ethan had built the digital infrastructure. Celeste had held the emotional line when most people would have shattered. Sophia and Tatiana had broken ranks from inside the enemy's walls without knowing each other existed. I had connected the circuits, routed the current from source to destination, balanced the load across every node, ensured that when the switch was pulled, every element would discharge simultaneously. 2 layers. Layer 1 draws Garrison into the open. Layer 2 uses Garrison's panic to pull Desmond into a federal courtroom. 1 bait, 2 traps, no second chances. I set the pen down, and my gaze drifted to the corner of the desk where a framed photograph had been sitting for 2 years. Hamptons, summer 2022. Late afternoon light, turning everything gold. Garrison standing on the beach with Celeste beside him, and Ren climbing onto his back, all 3 of them laughing at something I had said from behind the camera. I remember taking that photo. I remember thinking that my daughter had chosen well. I picked up the frame. The glass was cool against my fingers. Ren's face 5 years old in that photo, gap-toothed and sunburned and completely certain that the man holding her was exactly who he appeared to be. She didn't know yet that the arms around her belonged to someone who had already been bought, that the laughter was real, but the man producing it was performing a role written by someone in Houston who had never met her and never would. A grid operator learns early that the hardest shutdowns aren't the emergency ones. Those are pure adrenaline, pure reflex muscle memory taking over before thought catches up. The hardest shutdowns are the planned ones, The ones where you stand at the panel with your hand on the switch and you know exactly what goes dark when you pull it. You know which neighborhoods lose power. You know which hospitals switch to backup generators. You know the cost down to the kilowatt, and you pull the switch anyway. Because the alternative is a cascade failure that takes down everything. I placed the photo face down on the mahogany, not in a drawer, not turned to the wall, face down glass against wood so that the image was still there, but I couldn't see it. I didn't put it away because I wanted to forget. I put it face down because I needed to stop seeing the version of him that never existed. The paper with one sentence sat beside the photo. Outside the window, Manhattan hummed the way it always hums, millions of people running on a grid that never shuts off, never asks permission, never grieves. I pressed my palm flat against the glass and felt the city's vibration through my skin, the low, constant frequency of a system that doesn't care about motive. It only cares about current. Tomorrow I would begin the process of removing my granddaughter's father from her life. And no court filing, no wire recording, no offshore account would ever make that feel like winning. Tomorrow came the way all decisive mornings come not with ceremony, but with a phone that rang before sunrise and a body that had already been awake for hours, sitting in a library where a photo lay face down and a single sentence waited to be burned. Sophia Ashford opened her laptop in a parking garage 3 blocks from Blackwood Energy's Houston headquarters at 7:15 a.m. on November 11th. The concrete pillars amplified every sound, car doors echoing engines reverberating the mechanical groan of the ventilation system, pushing exhaust-thick air through the structure. She had chosen the location because it had no security cameras on the 3rd level, and because her car's tinted windows turned the back seat into the only private room she had left. Tatiana had flown in from New York that morning. She sat in the passenger seat smelling like airport coffee and sleeplessness, her coat still on her hands gripping her own knees. They had never met before. They had never spoken before, the encrypted email that connected them through Celeste's relay. And now, they sat side by side in a stranger's car. 2 women who had discovered independently that the same man had scheduled their disposal. Sophia turned the laptop screen toward Tatiana and opened the archive. 2,800 emails, 18 months of collection, every message sorted by date, tagged by operation. Cross-reference to the shell companies and wire transfers that made Desmond's machinery run. Email 1247, Sophia said. March 15th, subject line, Phase 2, Voss engagement timeline. She scrolled to it and let Tatiana read. He scheduled when you were supposed to sleep with Garrison. He put it in a project plan with milestones and deliverables. Tatiana read the email. She read the next one. She read a third and stopped. I thought I was the only one he was planning to throw away, she said. You're not. Sophia's voice was steady, the steadiness of a woman who had processed her own rage months ago and now operated on something colder. I found 7 emails where he discusses containment personnel. That's his word for people he's finished using. Your name is on the list. So is mine. Tatiana and Sophia sat in the back of that car in a Houston parking garage, 2 women who had never met before that morning, both instrumentalized by the same man. Both cataloged for erasure on the same spreadsheet, reading emails that proved their entire value to Desmond Blackwood was measured in how quietly they could be made to disappear. The laptop screen glowed between them like a window into machinery that had been running for years with their bodies as fuel. Tatiana closed the laptop. Give everything to Conrad Whitfield, she said. All of it. By the next evening, November 12th, everything was in one room. Prescott's apartment on the Upper West Side had been transformed. His dining table, mahogany 8 seats. Normally bare except for a stack of legal journals, was covered edge to edge with evidence folders. Printed emails fanned out in chronological sections. The offshore account trace sat in a blue binder. The bribe package occupied its own folder, flagged with red tabs. The Pierre Hotel recording rested on a USB drive beside Prescott's laptop, and the 2 women who had flown in from Houston that morning sat on a couch they had never sat on before, watching a 68-year-old attorney read their lives in 6-hour silence. Prescott reviewed everything. He read methodically, turning pages with the careful rhythm of a man who understands that every sheet of paper in front of him will eventually face a federal judge. Coffee was brewed 3 times. Chinese takeout was ordered and barely touched. Manhattan traffic hummed far below. Nobody spoke unless Prescott asked a question, and Prescott asked very few questions, because the documents answered most of them before he could. You want to know what 3 federal lawsuits look like before they're filed? They looked like an old man's dining table buried in folders. Two women from Houston sitting on a couch watching a lawyer read in silence cold containers of lo mein on the kitchen counter, and a clock on the wall ticking past 11 p.m., while everyone in the room waits for one word. At 11:47 p.m., Prescott closed the last folder. He set it down on the table with the careful precision of a man placing the final stone in a wall. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. SEC whistleblower filing for the stolen intelligence operation, he said. Civil RICO for the offshore scheme, and a separate Texas Railroad Commission complaint for the falsified technical report. He paused. 3 fronts. My hand was flat on the table. I could feel the wood vibrating faintly, not from the building, but from my own pulse. And when can we file? I asked. The Texas deadline is Friday the 15th. If we don't file the Railroad Commission complaint before that deadline, the lobby campaign succeeds by default, and the contract goes to Blackwood. I need the SEC filing submitted Thursday to create simultaneous pressure on both coasts. That gives us 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours to convert 7 weeks of covert intelligence into 3 simultaneous legal instruments across 2 states and 2 federal agencies. Prescott had spent 6 hours reading the evidence. He would spend the next 72 hours turning it into filings that could withstand every motion to dismiss every evidentiary challenge, every procedural objection that Desmond's legal team would throw at them. The clock read 11:52 p.m. Sophia and Tatiana sat on the couch watching. They had risked their careers, their safety, and their anonymity to deliver what was now spread across this table. The adrenaline tasted sharp and metallic in my mouth, the taste of a countdown that had just started. 3 days to end a 20-year war, or lose everything to a calendar. The FBI didn't knock on Garrison Voss's door. They sent a letter, which in some ways is worse because a knock ends with handcuffs or an apology. But a letter just sits on your kitchen counter and waits for you to understand what it means. We filed the SEC whistleblower complaint Thursday morning at 8:47 a.m. Prescott had worked 71 hours straight to make the deadline. By 9 a.m., the machinery was already moving. Celeste told me everything that happened next. She told me in the precise, clinical detail of a woman who had rehearsed this day in her mind for weeks and needed me to know that she had executed it exactly as we planned. Garrison was standing in their kitchen when the letter arrived. Plain government stationery. No seal on the envelope, just a return address that said Federal Bureau of Investigation, a New York field office. He opened it with the same hands that had poured Wren's orange juice 10 minutes earlier. The letter requested his voluntary cooperation as a material witness in a whistleblower complaint filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission that morning against Blackwood Energy Partners. Not an arrest, not a subpoena. A request which is the federal government's way of telling you that the subpoena is already drafted and sitting in a desk drawer, and this is your one chance to walk through the door before they kick it in. Garrison read the letter twice. His hands were trembling by the second reading. The morning coffee he had been drinking rose bitter in his throat. He set the letter on the counter and reached for his phone. It rang before he could dial. His lawyer, a man named Philip Deering, who handled corporate matters for mid-level executives and had never in 15 years of practice received a call like the one he was about to make. Garrison, I need you to listen carefully, Deering said. Celeste filed 20 minutes ago, divorce, full custody. She's asking the court to freeze your access to shared accounts pending investigation. 15 minutes. The FBI letter arrived at 9. The divorce notification came at 9:15. Garrison stood in his kitchen, holding a phone in one hand and a federal notification in the other, and understood Celeste had known about the complaint before he did. She had timed the filing to land while he was still reading the letter. 2 blows 15 minutes apart from 2 directions he never saw coming. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know what 15 minutes feels like when your entire life is being dismantled from 2 directions. Because I've watched Transformers blow under dual fault conditions. The system doesn't fail at the first hit. It fails at the second. Because the first one strips away every protection, the second one needs to kill you. The first fault trips the breaker. The second fault finds the breaker already open and drives the current straight through the core. That's what we did to Garrison that morning. We tripped his breaker with the FBI letter, then drove the divorce filing through the gap before he could reset. Celeste told me he didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He didn't call her name or look for her in the house she had already left, with Wren at 7:30. A.M. dropped Wren at school and driven to my apartment to wait. He simply stood in the kitchen with both documents in front of him, put on his coat, and walked out. He went to the courthouse. Not because anyone told him to, because it was the only building in Manhattan that felt like it might have answers. He walked through the marble lobby that smelled like floor wax and cold stone, past the security checkpoint, and stood in the hallway outside the clerk's office where his marriage was being dissolved, in a filing his wife had prepared while sleeping beside him for weeks. Then he walked outside and stood on the courthouse steps in the November wind and called Desmond. Let me tell you what silence sounds like when it comes from a man who promised you were partners. It sounds like 6 rings. Then voicemail. Desmond, it's Garrison. I need to talk to you. Now, call me back. He hung up. He called again. 4 rings this time, straight to voicemail. Desmond, the FBI sent a letter. Celeste filed for divorce. I need to know what's happening. Call me. He hung up. His fingers were numb from the cold or from the adrenaline, he couldn't tell. The wind cut through his coat and carried the sharp smell of approaching winter and exhaust from the street below. He pressed the phone hard against his ear and called a 3rd time. No ring, no voicemail, no connection. The screen displayed 2 words, call failed. Garrison lowered the phone and stared at it. The screen reflected his face back at him, a man standing on courthouse steps in a coat he had put on 3 hours ago, when he still thought today was a normal Thursday. A man who had just discovered that the taste of panic is not metallic the way people describe it. It's nothing. It's the taste of absolutely nothing, the absence of every flavor, every sensation, every reassurance he had ever been given by the man who had just turned his phone off somewhere in Houston. He gripped the stone railing of the courthouse steps. Behind him inside the building, his marriage was being dissolved. His access to his daughter was being frozen. His name was attached to a federal complaint that would become public record within hours. And ahead of him, somewhere in a Houston office overlooking a skyline built on oil money and silence, the man who had recruited him, used him, promised him partnership, and marked him as containment personnel had switched off his phone. Desmond's silence was the clearest answer Garrison had ever received. And standing on those steps with a dead phone and a November wind that didn't care about his coat or his marriage or his fear, he finally heard it. Garrison came to my library at 7:41 p.m., with his tie loosened and his eyes red, and the first thing I noticed was that he didn't knock. He just opened the door, the way a man does when he's already decided the rules no longer apply to him. Desmond's silence that morning had broken something in Garrison, not his will, but his belief that any of this had been a partnership. He had stood on courthouse steps with a dead phone and no answers, and now he was standing in my doorway, looking for the only person left who might give him one. I was ready for him. I had been ready for 7 months. The desk was empty. No folders, no evidence binders, no printed emails or USB drives or photographs. Just a glass of cold water on the mahogany surface untouched. Condensation beating slowly down the sides. The library smelled like leather and old books and the absence of anything performative. I had considered placing the evidence on the desk, a dramatic reveal, every document fanned out for maximum impact. Then I realized that would be theater, and theater was what Desmond did. What I do is engineering, and the most devastating engineering is invisible. You have to listen to my explanation, Garrison said from the doorway. His voice had the raw quality of a man who had been talking to lawyers all day. You owe me that. I'm your daughter's husband. Sit down, I said. He sat. 30 seconds passed. I counted them on the library clock, the same clock that had ticked through every late night I had spent in this room, assembling the architecture of this moment. The tick filled the silence the way a metronome fills an empty concert hall. Garrison's eyes moved from the empty desk to the water glass to my face, searching for a clue about what was coming. His confusion was genuine. He didn't understand why there was nothing on the desk. He had expected evidence. He had expected accusations. He had prepared defenses. I gave him none of those things. I gave him a timeline. April, I said. I identified Desmond's involvement in April. The offshore account, I traced it through 3 shell layers by June. Tatiana, I've known about her since August. I watched his face change 4 times in 30 seconds. First confusion, he still didn't understand why the desk was empty. Then recognition. He understood I wasn't asking questions because I already had every answer. Then fear. And finally, the one I had been waiting 7 months to see. The look of a man who realizes he was never the hunter. He was the instrument, the tool, the circuit through which someone else's current flowed. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair. His breathing changed shorter, shallower, the respiration of a system losing pressure. That's not possible, he said. You couldn't have known since April. I was careful. The downloads were Project Decoy, I said. He stopped. March. I built it in March. 847 files loaded onto a partitioned server with monitoring software embedded in every document. Every time you accessed a file, I knew which one. Every time you copied it, I logged the transfer. Every time Houston opened it, Ethan tracked the IP address. I let that settle the way. You let voltage stabilize after a surge, not rushing, not explaining, just allowing the system to process the new load. Not a single byte you sent to Houston is real Garrison. You've been stealing from an empty vault for 7 months. In 35 years of building power grids, I've learned that the most dangerous systems aren't the ones that fail loudly. They're the ones that run perfectly for months while every reading on the dashboard is a fabrication. And the operator doesn't know the difference until someone walks into the control room and shows him that the gauges were never connected to anything real. Garrison had been reading gauges for 7 months. Every number was mine. He sat motionless. His tie hung loose against his chest. His eyes were fixed on the empty desk, as if the absence of evidence was worse than any document I could have shown him, because it meant I didn't need evidence. I had never needed it. The evidence was theater. The reality was that I had known everything from the beginning. And I had let him continue because his continued theft was the mechanism that drew Desmond deeper into a trap built on data that didn't exist. The clock ticked. The water glass sweated. Manhattan glowed through the window behind me, the same skyline I had watched the night I placed the photo face down. The same grid humming at 62 hertz beneath everything. Your lawyer will hear from mine tomorrow, I said. 6 words. No rage, no raised voice. No satisfaction because there was none to feel. This was not victory. This was amputation. Garrison stood up at 8:17 p.m. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand pressing against the frame, and said one thing I didn't expect. She already knows, doesn't she? Celeste already knows everything. I didn't answer. He nodded once the nod of a man confirming what silence had already told him, and left. His footsteps descended the stairs with the slow, measured cadence of someone who understands that rushing won't change what's waiting at the bottom. The front door opened. Cold November air drifted up the stairwell, carrying the faint trace of his cologne. The door closed. I sat alone in the library with an empty desk and a glass of water I never drank. The chair across from me still held the impression of where he had been sitting. The clock ticked past 8:20. The city hummed. I was only partially finished. Garrison was broken, but Desmond Blackwood was still standing. And in the morning, the final filing would land on his desk in Houston, and 20 years of unfinished business would reach its conclusion. The RICO filing left Prescott's office at 6 a.m. Eastern. By 6:12 a.m. Houston time, Desmond Blackwood's personal phone was ringing, and the fortress he had spent 20 years building began to come apart from the inside. Desmond Blackwood was 66 years old, CEO of Blackwood Energy Partners. A man who controlled drilling rights across 3 states and maintained a lobbying operation that had killed contracts worth billions. He had been my rival for 2 decades, and in all that time, I had never once seen him lose control. I had imagined it. I had planned for it, but I wasn't there to witness it. Prescott's Houston co-counsel provided the details later, and Sophia confirmed them. The first call came from his Washington attorney. The Department of Justice had initiated a formal investigation into Blackwood Energy Partners' corporate espionage evidence tampering and conspiracy to defraud a federal contractor. The second call came 90 seconds later from the SEC referencing the whistleblower complaint filed in New York the previous morning. The third call, the one that broke him, came from his own security chief. Sir Sophia Ashford accessed the building at 4 a.m. She met with 2 FBI agents in the parking garage. She had a box. She's gone. Sophia had entered Blackwood Energy's Houston headquarters. In the pre-dawn humidity, walked past the security desk she had passed every morning for 3 years, descended to the parking garage, and handed 2 federal agents a cardboard box containing the physical copies of every email she had archived. Then she drove away and never came back. By the time Desmond read the first notification, the woman who had organized his calendar, typed his correspondence, and filed his travel expenses had already delivered the instruments of his destruction to the people who would use them. Desmond swept his desk clean, papers scattered. A crystal paperweight hit the floor and cracked against the marble. His untouched breakfast sat cooling on the credenza eggs and toast, ordered from the executive kitchen at 5:45 a.m., before the world was still the shape he recognized. He picked up the phone with a hand that was shaking and called the lawyer he had retained for 20 years. "I need you here right now. Not tomorrow, not this afternoon, right now. You want to know what 2 decades of hatred look like when they finally collapse. They look like a 66-year-old man in a Houston corner office at 6:30 in the morning. Standing over a desk, he just swept bare surrounded by cracked crystal and scattered papers, calling an attorney he has paid millions to retain, and hearing for the first time the sound of his own voice shaking. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In none of those imaginings did it feel the way it actually felt, which was not triumphant, not satisfying, but heavy, the way a structure feels when the last load-bearing wall has been removed, and the building is still standing for a few more seconds, only because gravity hasn't finished the math. At 1:15 p.m. Central Time, the Texas Railroad Commission suspended Blackwood Energy's competing bid for the smart grid contract, citing the pending federal investigation as grounds for disqualification. The suspension was automatic, triggered by the RICO filing, processed by a bureaucracy that didn't care about 20-year rivalries or stolen data or fabricated technical reports. It was just a form, a checkbox, a system doing what systems do when the inputs change. At 2:37 p.m. Eastern, I sat at my desk on the 47th floor and looked at an electronic signature screen displaying the contract I had been fighting for since before my daughter was old enough to understand what her father built for a living. The clean air system hummed at its steady frequency. Manhattan spread out behind me through the glass. Ethan stood 3 feet to my right, hands clasped behind his back. A grid operator signs a contract, the same way he closes a circuit. Steady hand, clear head, full awareness of what flows through the system the moment the connection is made. I pressed my fingertip to the screen. The signature registered. At 2:37 p.m., $340 million of current began flowing through my company. At the same moment, 1,200 miles south, Desmond Blackwood's grid went dark. The commission suspended Blackwood's bid at 1:15 their time, Ethan said. "You won by default and by merit, both." I set the pen down. Ethan extended his hand the first time in 21 years of working together. His grip was dry and steady, the handshake of a man who understood the weight of the moment without needing to narrate it. I shook his hand and felt nothing that resembled celebration. I felt the way a surgeon feels when the 12-hour operation ends and the patient's vitals stabilize relief, that it worked exhaustion from the hours it took, and the knowledge that recovery would be longer than anyone wanted to admit. I drank water, not champagne, not whiskey, just water flat and cold from the same glass I kept on my desk every day. It tasted like nothing. Victory tasted like nothing. In Houston, Desmond sat across from his lawyer in a building that still bore his name, surrounded by people who charge by the hour and loyalty that charge by the crisis, learning that every weapon he had constructed against me over 20 years had been turned around and fired from inside his own walls. 2 women he had treated as disposable had dismantled him. A man he had tried to bribe had recorded him. A son-in-law he had weaponized had been stealing fabricated data for 7 months. And the contract that started our war, the same dollar figure. The same 2 men on opposite ends of the same rope now sat on my desk, with my signature on it. I pulled, he fell, and the rope between us after 20 years finally went slack. What does a man look like when he walks into a federal building to testify against the person who promised him everything, knowing that the only thing waiting on the other side is a lighter sentence and an empty apartment? The rope had gone slack. The contract was signed. Desmond's empire was under federal investigation from 2 directions. But the machinery of justice moves at its own speed, and what I had built in 7 months would take the courts another 2 months to process. In early December, Garrison entered the DOJ cooperators room at the federal courthouse wearing a gray suit under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty, regardless of their intentions. Prescott sat across the table as my legal representative, his notepad open, his pen, moving in the steady rhythm of a man recording testimony he had spent months engineering the conditions to produce. Garrison's hands were flat on the metal table. His voice was a monotone, the flat, effectless cadence of a man reciting facts he had carried for 2 years, and no longer had the energy to disguise. First contact was March 2022, he said. He approached me at an energy conference in Dallas. He said he wanted to collaborate. By June, he was asking for internal specifications. By September, I was being paid. The DOJ attorney asked about the offshore routing. Garrison provided it without hesitation. 3 shell companies, the Cayman account, every transaction date across 22 months. He recited the numbers the way I recite load calculations from memory without emotion, each figure precise to the decimal. Prescott's notepad filled steadily. The recycled air in the room smelled like institutional coffee and carpet cleaner. Garrison drank from a vending machine cup between answers and never looked at Prescott directly. Not because he was ashamed of the testimony, but because Prescott was the physical reminder that every word leaving his mouth was traveling directly to me. The tool had turned against its master. Garrison dismantled Desmond's operation with the same methodical precision he had once used to steal data from my servers, naming every intermediary, every dollar amount, every encrypted channel, every meeting date. He was in the end exactly the kind of employee Desmond had always wanted, thorough, obedient, and willing to follow instructions without asking where they led. The only difference was that the instructions were now coming from a federal prosecutor instead of a Houston billionaire. January arrived the way winter always arrives in New York. Slowly then, all at once, the cold settling into the city like a verdict the sky had been deliberating for months. I watched Desmond's sentencing on a 14-inch newsfeed from my office. The same office where the contract sat in a frame on the wall behind my desk. The same window. The same humming grid beneath the floor. I chose not to be in that Houston courtroom because my presence would have been theater, and I had spent 7 months proving that I don't do theater. The judge read the verdict at 10:17 a.m. Central. Guilty on all counts, federal industrial espionage, bribery, organized conspiracy. 7 years in federal custody. A fine matching the exact value of the contract he had spent 2 decades trying to steal. His company placed under federal supervision for no less than 5 years. Through the screen, I could see his hand trembling on the defense table. Just his hand. The rest of him was still the way a building looks intact from the outside, even after the foundation has cracked. 7 years. 7 years of a building with his name on it, running without him inside it. 7 years of someone else sitting in his chair, making decisions with his money, operating the machinery he built. 7 years of learning what it feels like to be a node disconnected from its own grid. The fine matched the contract. The same number of symmetry so precise that no engineer could have designed it. But every complex system eventually produces patterns that look intentional in retrospect. 20 years earlier, that figure had been the prize we both reached for. Now it was the price he paid for reaching the wrong way. Later that same month, Celeste stood on the SDNY courthouse steps in cold January sunlight. The custody hearing had lasted 40 minutes. The family court judge awarded her full custody during the school year with supervised visitation for Garrison on alternate weekends. The offshore funds were recovered for the Federal Victims Restitution Program. The divorce was finalized in language so clinical it could have been describing the dissolution of a business partnership rather than a marriage. Celeste called me from those steps. I was sitting at my desk with the Manhattan skyline behind me and the family photo still face down on the mahogany where I had placed it 47 days earlier. I hadn't turned it over, not once. Her voice was steady, not happy, not relieved, just finished. The way a surgeon sounds after the final stitch, not celebrating, just confirming the patient survived. "It's over, Dad." 3 words. I held the phone against my ear and didn't say anything for 5 seconds. Some silences are the only honest response to the end of something that consumed everything you had. 47 days since the filing. 7 months since the first call to Prescott. 20 years since Desmond shook my hand at a conference in Dallas and called me partner. 3 words. And the court said it was finished. I set the phone down and looked at the skyline through the same window I had pressed my palm against the night I put the photo face down. The photo was still there. Glass against wood. The image of a man holding my granddaughter on his back in Hampton's sunlight, laughing at something I said from behind the camera. The courts were finished. The contracts were signed. The sentence was delivered, but somewhere in this city. My granddaughter would eventually ask her mother why her father only visited every other Saturday. That question hadn't been filed yet. That verdict hadn't been delivered. And I understood that over was the wrong word because the war was won, but the cost was still being counted. Tatiana Frost called me one last time on a Tuesday morning in January, not to ask for anything, not to apologize. Just to tell me she was leaving New York and that she hadn't slept without pills since November. Ren hadn't asked the question yet. the one about every other Saturday, but I could feel it forming the way you feel pressure building in a system before the gauge moves invisible, inevitable, patient. Tatiana's voice came through the phone with the thin quality of someone who has been awake too long and medicated too often. She was packing a suitcase in an empty apartment. I could hear the zipper in the background, the hollow acoustics of a room with nothing on the walls. "I can't sleep without the pills," she said. I close my eyes and I see Celeste's face when I told her about the money. She didn't cry. That was worse. She was moving to Nashville, alone, no job waiting, no one expecting her. The federal prosecutors had exempted her from charges in exchange for her testimony. And the baby, the pregnancy that had been manufactured as leverage, had been returned to Reed Holloway, the biological father, through a family court process that took less than an hour. Tatiana's role in the story was over, and what remained was a 34-year-old woman with a prescription bottle on her nightstand and a suitcase half-packed for a city where nobody knew what she had done or what had been done to her. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm going." I thanked her. I meant it. And I set the phone down, knowing I would never hear from her again. 2 days later, an anonymous email arrived on my screen. No sender name, no return address. Routed through 3 proxy servers. The kind of routing Prescott's team recognized immediately as someone who had learned to hide. "Thank you for not asking me why I did it. Some mornings I still check over my shoulder. I moved to a city where no one knows my name. That's not freedom. It's the closest thing to it I could afford." Sophia, witness protection, had relocated her to Dallas under a new identity. She had dismantled a billionaire's empire from the inside, handed the FBI enough evidence to secure a federal conviction. And her reward was a new name, in a new city, and the habit of checking exits every time she walked into a room. Let me tell you the truth about the people who help you win. They don't get parades. Tatiana moved to Nashville with a suitcase and a prescription. Sophia moved to Dallas with a new name and a reflex that would never fully quiet. The 2 women who handed me the evidence that ended a 20-year war didn't get justice. They got distance. And distance is not the same thing as peace. I drank cold coffee reading Sophia's email and tasted the flat residue of a victory that cost other people more than it cost me. Late one evening near the end of January, the elevator opened on the 47th floor and Garrison walked out. No lawyer, no briefcase, no phone in his hand. Just a man in a winter coat with his hands open at his sides, walking down an empty hallway toward my office door. Security had called up. I told them to let him come. He stood in the doorway. The building was empty. The grid hummed beneath us the way it always does. January night air leaked through the window seals, carrying the sterile cold of a city that had been through its own kind of winter. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm not here to explain." I waited. "Can you let Ren remember me as someone who isn't entirely bad?" His voice was quiet, not broken, not pleading, just careful. The voice of a man choosing each word because he knows they might be the last ones that matter. "That's all I'm asking, not forgiveness. Just don't rewrite me for her." "What do you do with a man who destroyed your daughter's marriage, betrayed your company, and sold your life's work to your enemy, but who also loved your granddaughter enough to come back? Without a lawyer with empty hands and ask you not to erase him from her memory, you let him sit with the question, and then you answer it honestly. That depends on what she truly remembers about you," I said. "I will not interfere with my granddaughter's memories. What you were to her is between you and her." He nodded, not gratitude acknowledgement, the nod of a man who asked for the minimum and received exactly that. He left at 10:47 p.m. His footsteps echoed down the empty hallway. The elevator doors opened and closed. The building settled back into its after-hours silence, the mechanical breathing of climate systems, and the low electrical hum of a grid that runs whether anyone is watching or not. I sat in my chair until 11. The cold leather warmed slowly against my back. The office smelled like the last cup of coffee I had poured hours ago, and the absence of anything human. Manhattan glowed through the window. The same skyline, the same grid, the same city that had witnessed every phase of this war without caring about any of it. And I thought about the one thing that separated Garrison from Desmond. Garrison came back. He walked into the office of the man who had dismantled his life and asked about his daughter. Desmond never came. Desmond never asked about anyone. That's the line not between good and bad, but between weak and evil. Garrison was weak. Desmond was evil. And I had destroyed them both with the same machinery. And I would have to live with the fact that one of them deserved it completely and the other deserved it only mostly. I turned off the lights. I stood in the dark for a long time, looking at Manhattan, thinking about the one question no court had answered when Ren is old enough to understand what happened. Will she forgive the grandfather who took her father away even if taking him away was the right thing to do? The first Sunday morning that felt almost normal was the last Sunday in January. Ren was eating cereal at the kitchen counter. Celeste was holding coffee with both hands. Lorraine was making eggs the way she's made them for 32 years. Butter first, low heat scrambled, with a patience that has outlasted every crisis this family has produced. And for exactly 4 minutes, nobody mentioned anything that had happened. The answer to my question whether Ren would forgive me didn't come in a courtroom or a phone call. It came in a kitchen on a Sunday, in January sunlight that cut across the counter and landed on my granddaughter's cereal bowl like a spotlight she didn't know she was standing in. Her spoon paused midair. Milk dripped back into the bowl. She looked at me with the steady, unblinking focus of a child who has been composing a sentence in her head for days and has finally decided to say it. Did Grandpa when his dad come in to see me? The kitchen went silent. Celeste's knuckles whitened on her mug. Lorraine's spatula stopped against the pan. The only sound was the refrigerator humming its low mechanical note and the distant percussion of Manhattan outside the windows. I got down on one knee beside her chair. The kitchen floor was cold through my trousers. I put my hand on the counter next to her bowl, and I looked at her face 10 years old. Gap-toothed smile gone, now replaced by something more careful, more watchful. The face of a child who has learned that adults don't always tell the truth, but hasn't yet decided what to do with that knowledge. That's soon, sweetheart. He loves you. Soon was honest. He loves you was probably still true. And some mornings that's the best a family can do. Not the complete answer. Not the comfortable one. Just the truest thing you can manage while kneeling on a kitchen floor with eggs burning on the stove, and your daughter's hand tightening on a coffee mug she's been gripping like a lifeline since September. Lorraine turned back to the stove. Celeste exhaled. Ren nodded once the same nod her father had given me in my office the night he asked me not to erase him, and went back to her cereal. That afternoon, I brought Ren to the 47th floor. The building was empty on weekends. I let her sit in my chair, and I showed her the smart grid display, 14 states glowing on the screen. Each node pulsing with the current that flows through the system I spent 35 years building. See these lights, I said. Each one is a node, a piece of the system. When they all work together, 14 states have power. Hospitals run, schools stay warm, traffic lights keep working. When one node fails, the grid reroutes around it. The system survives. She studied the screen the way she studies everything seriously, completely, with the focused attention of a child who hasn't yet learned that most adults stop paying attention after the first sentence. What if a node tries to sabotage the grid? She asked. The system detects it, isolates it, and keeps running without it. She took my hand in the control room, her fingers tiny around 2 of mine, and she said it so simply that it broke something in me I didn't know was still intact. It's like our family, isn't it, Grandpa? 10 years old. She understood rerouting and survival before I ever explained it. Some lessons you don't teach children. They arrive at them on their own, standing in front of a screen full of lights, holding your hand, making sense of the world, with a metaphor you built but never intended for this purpose. I held her hand and I didn't answer because some questions don't need answers. They need presence. That evening after Celeste took Ren home and Lorraine went upstairs, I sat in my study with the desk lamp on and the Manhattan skyline glowing through the window. The family photo was still face down on the mahogany where I had placed it in November. I picked it up. Hamptons 2022. Garrison holding Ren on his back. Celeste laughing. Golden light. I turned it face up. Set it back on the desk. His face visible for the first time in months. I could have confronted Garrison that night at the Hamptons dinner. I could have stood up from the table and said what I knew the moment I saw the irregularity on the server. I didn't. I chose patience. I chose the long architecture. And I won, if you can call it winning, when your granddaughter asks when her father is coming, and the honest answer is every other Saturday, supervised in a room with a social worker taking notes. So, I'll ask you the question I've been asking myself since September. If you saw the cracks forming in your family, the lies, the late-night phone calls, the averted eyes at dinner, would you have sat back and built the case? Or would you have stood up and lost everything in a single evening? I don't know which answer is right. I only know which one I chose and what it cost. The grid never shuts off. 14 states run on the system I built. My family runs on a different kind of grid now, smaller, rewired, missing a node that used to stand at the center of it. The system reroutes, the system endures. But some nodes, the ones that were closest, the ones you trusted most, leave a scar that no diagnostic can erase and no software update can patch. And every Sunday morning, when Ren sits at the kitchen counter and eats her cereal and doesn't ask the question, those are the mornings that hurt most. Because it means she's learning to stop hoping. And that is the one thing I never wanted to teach her. And to you listening to my story, remember this: patience is not the same as weakness. Silence is not the same as surrender. And the people who underestimate a quiet man are always the ones who never see what's coming. Don't make my mistake of waiting so long to trust the people around you. I spent months carrying everything alone: the evidence, the anger, the grief, because I thought protecting my family meant doing it all myself. It nearly broke me. If I could go back, I would have leaned on Celeste sooner. I would have trusted the people who were already fighting beside me, instead of shielding them from the cost. This family story taught me something I couldn't learn from 35 years of engineering. You can build the strongest grid in the world, but it means nothing if the people inside your own house are falling apart. Every family story has cracks. What matters is whether you repair them or let someone else exploit them. I believe God put me through this for a reason. Not to punish me, but to teach me that the real infrastructure isn't steel and copper and fiber optics. It's the people who stay when everything gets hard. And that's the family story worth telling. Not the one about revenge, but the one about what survives after the revenge is over. If this story made you think, if it made you ask yourself what you would have done, I'd love to hear your answer in the comments. Tell me, would you have sat back or stood up? And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Subscribe to Revenge Dad so you never miss the next one. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Just a reminder, certain details in this story were fictionalized for narrative and emotional impact. The message behind it is what I hope stays with you: take care of your family. They're the only grid that truly matters.